Chapter 6. Home is a horse stall. Crowded along the rail around the racetrack, watching for arriving friends, were hundreds of Japanese who had been evacuated earlier from the Bay Area. The first familiar face Yuki saw was Mr. Toda. He waved eagerly, and he waved back, or she waved eagerly, and he waved back in an awkward sort of salute. Yuki waved again and again, feeling better just at the sight of someone she knew. As they got off the bus, they were directed to an area roped off beneath a grandstand where each family registered, filled out forms, and went through a brief medical inspection. The baggage they carried was inspected for contraband, and then they were assigned living quarters. Barrack 16, apartment 40, Ken read from the slip handed to him. Golly, Yuki said, impressed. We get an apartment? She had never lived in an apartment and found the prospect intriguing. She moved eagerly now, keeping close to Ken. Hey, Ken. It was Ken's classmate, Jim Hirai. Hey, Jim, Ken shouted back, and they pounded each other on the back as though they hadn't seen each other for 10 years. I hope you find your quarters, Jim offered. But now, Mother was surrounded by her church friends who had arrived 2 days earlier. She was bowing and greeting them as though they were meeting on the sunny walk outside their church in Oakland. They quickly exchanged barrack numbers, and Mr. Toda and the minister promised to come visit them later. I'm in the bachelor's quarters here, Mr. Toda said rather dismally. I must share a room with 5 other men. It's a strange new life, he added, and he did not look happy. Yuki was anxious to see where they would be living. Come on, Mama, she urged, and they quickly followed Ken and Jim down the racetrack. It had rained the night before, and the track was muddy and pocked with puddles. Yuki's new saddle shoes were soon covered with mud, and Mother's blue shoes were oozing with it. Glad I packed rubber boots for us, she remarked, and she held on to Yuki's arm to keep from slipping. As they walked along, Yuki saw that wherever there was room, tar-papered army barracks had been put up for 8,000 Japanese, who would soon be living there. Barrack 16, however, was not among them. Now Ken and Jim were leaving the northern end of the track and disappearing beyond a cluster of eucalyptus trees. When Yuki and Mother caught up with them, they were going up the wide ramp of a stable that stood about a foot above the ground. There was a sign tacked to a corner of the stable that read, Barrack 16. This isn't a barrack at all, Yuki said, disappointed. It's just a dirty old stable. They followed Ken and Jim along the narrow walk that took them past a dozen stalls, each marked with a number, and then stopped in front of the one marked 40. Well, this is it, Jim said, nudging the door open. The stall was narrow and dark, with 2 small windows high up on either side of the door. It measured about 10 by 20 feet and was empty except for 3 army cots that lay folded on the floor. There were no mattresses or bedding of any kind. Dust and dirt and wood shavings still littered the linoleum that had been hastily laid over the manure-covered floor, and Ken sniffed the lingering odor left by the former occupants. Boy, he said, wrinkling his nose, there's no mistaking who lived here before us. Yuki looked around the stall, feeling as though she'd been handed an empty ice cream cone. This is an apartment? She asked, dismayed. That, my dear child, is what's known as a euphemism, Jim said to her. You'll get used to things like that here. Yuki didn't know what Jim meant, but she didn't want to show her ignorance. She grinned at him and went to inspect the rear half of the stall, which was separated from the front by a Dutch door worn down with teeth marks. The walls had been whitewashed so hurriedly that insects hadn't had time to escape, and their small white corpses still clung to the walls along with cobwebs and horseshoes and rusty nails. Even Mother, who usually found something cheerful to say about most difficulties, seemed at a loss for words. Well, she said at last, the first thing we need to do is sweep out this place. Can you help us find a broom, Jim? The 2 days he had been in camp, Jim had quickly learned where to find things. Sure, he said, and you'll need some mattresses too. Come on, Ken, let's go. The boys set up the cots before they left, putting up 2 in the inner half of the stall for Yuki and Mother, and 1 in the front for Ken. Yuki blew off the dust from the springs, and Mother brushed away what she could with her handkerchief. Then she sat down, took off her hat and gloves, and put them down on the cot beside her. Oh, Mama, Yuki said, laughing, you sure didn't need a hat and gloves to come live in a horse stall. Mother never went anywhere, without a hat and gloves, not even to the corner to mail a letter. It was a habit she had acquired when she first arrived in America, and she had never changed since. She was a perfect lady, and Yuki supposed she always would be. She smiled now at Yuki and brushed the dust from her hands. "You're right, Yuki-chan," she said wistfully. "I guess I will hardly be needing a hat when I go out here." Everyone who had been at Tanforan for more than a day seemed to be dressed in slacks and sweaters, wearing a bandana because of the dust and the wind. Mother didn't even own a pair of slacks, and oh, sorry, Mother didn't even own a pair of slacks, and Yuki had never seen her put anything but a hat on her head. "I'll lend you one of my scarves," she offered, and then she left Mother to rest on a cot and went out to investigate the surrounding area. The latrines and washroom for their section were about 100 feet away, and when Yuki saw those, she knew that Mother would have much more to worry about than not having slacks or a scarf. None of the toilet cubicles had doors, and neither did the showers. There were no wash basins, but only a long tin trough that seemed more appropriate for horses. Yuki hurried back to their stall and shouted as she burst inside, "Golly, Mama, you should see the latrines!" She stopped when she saw Jim. "Oh," she murmured, embarrassed. But Jim just kept right on sweeping, and Ken said, "That's okay, Yuki. We know what they're like. No doors." Apparently, Jim had already told Ken about the inadequacies of camp life. Yuki flopped down on one of the cots and bounced tentatively on the mattress the boys had just brought back. It rustled noisily and scratched her legs. "Stuffed with straw," she shouted. "This must have been left over from the horses." But Jim quickly told her she was lucky to have any mattress at all. "We got the last 3 they had," she explained. "Ah," Mother sighed. Already she was worried for the people who would come later and discover that there were no mattresses for them. As Yuki sat squirming on the prickly straw mattress, she suddenly realized that she was famished. "No wonder," she murmured aloud. "We didn't have any lunch." "That's right," Ken said weirdly. "I thought I was beginning to grow weak." It was probably the first time in Ken's life that he'd gone for more than 4 hours without food of some kind. "Well, supper's at 5 o'clock, and you'd better get to the mess hall early," Jim warned him. "The lines are long, and it takes forever to get inside." Then, glancing at his watch, he hurried to his own quarters to take a shower before supper. By the time Yuki, Ken, and Mother got to the mess hall and the grandstand, people were streaming toward it from all parts of the 100-acre camp. Already, several long lines had formed, and those who had received their baggage were holding the plates and utensils they'd been instructed to bring. They stood silently and patiently, waiting for the lines to move. The sun was going down now, and the wind whipped through the open stretches of the racetrack, sending swirls of dust in everyone's face. Yuki shivered and turned her back to the wind, huddling close to Mother to try to keep warm. It was almost an hour before they got inside the gloomy mess hall and the serving table. A white-aproned man was using his fingers to put 2 canned sausages on each person's plate from a dishpan piled high with sausages. Another man gave each of them 1 boiled potato and a piece of bread. "Is this all?" Ken asked. The man nodded silently. At home, Ken would have considered this only an appetizer. The enormous room was filled with wooden picnic tables, but with 5,000 people milling about, it was hard to find a vacant table. At last they found one they could share with an old man and a young family with 2 crying babies. When they sat down, however, Yuki no longer felt like eating. The sight of the sausages heaped high in the dishpan hadn't helped. Mother must have felt the same, for Yuki saw her quietly slip her sausages onto Ken's plate and take only a few bites of her potato. They left as soon as Ken finished eating, walking carefully along the dark, muddy track. Tanforan wasn't equipped for nighttime use, and there were few lights to help them find their way. Their small stall now looked more bleak than ever, and the single electric bulb that dangled from the ceiling made only a forlorn effort to brighten the darkness. Their stall faced north, and the cold wind that blew in from the crevices around the windows and door made the light bulbs sway and cast eerie shadows on the wall. Yuki pulled her coat tightly around her and sat hunched on Ken's Caught. Beginning to hate this place already, she murmured. You know what I'd like right now? Ken asked dreamily. A nice, juicy steak, medium rare, with onions on the side and a big baked potato full of sour cream, and a huge piece of apple pie with ice cream and stop it! Yuki shrieked. You're giving me hunger pangs. Mother opened her purse and felt in all its corners. I don't even have any candy, she said dismally. It was a sad day for Mother when she couldn't offer something good to eat to provide her family some comfort. She looked hopeless and frail as she glanced around the stall, unable to find anything in it that would offer some cheer. If only our baggage would come, she said. I could at least make some hot tea. And then, as though her thoughts had miraculously produced the fact itself, she heard a truck pull up outside the stable. Hey, Sakane family, a voice shouted. Does this monster belong to you? It was their camp bundle. Ken rushed to the door to claim it, even though he was embarrassed to admit it. Right here, he called out. As soon as he had wedged the big bundle through the narrow door, Ken untied the ropes, and they quickly pulled out all the things Mother had packed inside. Every familiar and useful object looked like an old friend. Yuki ran to the washroom to fill a kettle with water. Ken hooked up the hot plate, and Mother began putting the blankets and sheets on the cots. Yuki sat close to the hot plate, watching its coils glow with heat and feeling better as the water in the kettle began to hum. She jumped when she heard a knock at the door. It was Mr. Tota, shivering without a coat in the brisk night air. I brought you a little something, he said to Yuki, holding out a small bag of peanuts. Yuki couldn't have been happier if it were a sack of gold. Huh. Oh, Mr. Tota, she squealed, you're wonderful. And she gave the surprised old man a hug that embarrassed him. It's only one bag of peanuts, he said sheepishly. Yuki divided it carefully, pouring a few into each of their palms. Ken popped a handful into his mouth and swallowed the whole thing in one delicious gulp, but Yuki ate one peanut at a time, chewing carefully and slowly, savoring each small bite. Mother was happy now, making tea and serving it in the cup she had packed. Well, here we are, she said, smiling at Mr. Tota, having tea together just as we used to at home. Ha, Mr. Tota answered with a half-smile. It's hardly like being in your home, Mrs. Sakane. And even as he spoke, they could hear voices of the people who lived all around them, for the walls between each stall lacked a foot from the ceiling, and every sound, except for the smallest whisper, traveled easily to the next stall. No fighting with Ken here, Yuki thought, listening. No secrets at all. And she popped the last peanut into her mouth, recalling with sudden longing Mrs. Nelson's delicious turkey dinner.